Welcome everyone to Mail Fuzz TV. I am Peter, and today I'm going to be talking about the Twilight Zone from the 1980s. This is season 1, episode 15. There's 3 stories in this one. They are called Monsters, A Small Talent for War, and A Matter of Minutes. So spoilers for the episode. This is a Patreon sponsored review, so thank you very much to Alison for picking the show. This has got 2 pretty solid stories, and then one I thought was interesting to watch, but I don't know if I love the science fiction side. It feels like it's kind of a quirky take on time mechanics just for the sake of doing a fun story, which is fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But that's the third one though, so we'll get to that. We'll start off obviously with the first one, which is Monsters, which is about a young boy who's really into monster movies and really into horror movies and stuff like that. Seems to bond with his dad over that kind of stuff. But he's upset because his neighbours, some kids that he's friends with, are moving away. We never get to see these characters, we just know that his friends are moving away from the street and someone new is moving in. And it turns out to be this old man. He goes over to sort of snoop to figure out if whoever's moving in's got kids or grandkids in this case. But he doesn't. But it's interesting, this one, because in a weird way I was disappointed with one of the directions that it went in. Because some of the early vibes I was getting was giving me like a Burbs type story where the kid kind of like notices this old guy's maybe a little bit creepy, that there's something more going on there. And when I say creepy, I don't mean like in a super intimidating way, but just in the sense that there's something supernatural going on. There's something unusual about this new neighbor. And I thought, oh, it's going to be about him spying on him and eventually seeing who he is and what he's up to, and maybe there'll be a horror outcome, maybe there'll be a sweet outcome, but I thought that's what the focus was going to be. It kind of pivoted away from that, though. It went down its own particular lane, but a credit to the story is that I wasn't that disappointed overall by the end, because I thought it kind of did some interesting different things. It seemed to have like a core idea that it was going for that I couldn't really argue with once it started to really plant its seeds and kind of get the ideas out there. Which is to say that as it goes, it seems, the old man jokes that he's a vampire. So our main character, the kid, starts to obviously believe that and spies on him a little bit, and even sees him seemingly pick up a car with one hand. Like, I mean, not over his head, but he sort of like picks up the front of a car to get underneath it with one hand. And it's like, oh, super strength. Maybe he is a vampire. Exciting. But the old man kind of just starts to befriend him and sort of kind of admit. He never says the words after that he's a vampire, but the kid finds some blood bags, which maybe suggest that he is, and whatever. Obviously, it's Twilight Zone, so you're kind of looking for the subtext as you're watching along and whatever. But just so that I can get into the subtext and maybe talk about what's going on here, the way the story wraps up is that throughout the story, the kid's parents start to get a little bit sick. Right? In fact, the kid starts getting sick first, and then the parents start getting a little bit sick, like they've got the flu or something like that. Complain about sore, aches and pains, joints, they're sneezing a lot, all that kind of thing. And the old man keeps talking to the kid about how he's been traveling the world, because if you stay in one place too long, if you're like his kind, that they'll come for you. The real monsters will come for you. And the big ending is that all the people who are sick, all the regular people in the town, all shed their skin and turn into monsters of some kind. At first I thought they were specifically turned into like Wolfman type monsters. I think it's actually a bit more vague than that, and it's more of a general monsters. It's not necessarily meant to be any sort of specific type of monster. And they come to the home of the old man, who's basically said by this point in the episode that he's come home because he thinks it's time to die. He thinks it's time for him to move on, and he's kind of accepting this. He sits down in a chair with a drink, and he kind of waits for them to come. And the end of the story is that, yeah, seemingly all these monsters that have come from all the regular people have killed the old man. But in the morning, this old man's just dead in his house, and all the people are back to normal and have no memory that they ever changed, that they came after him, or anything like that. And there's just one little thing where the old man had spoken to the kid about, hey, things are going to get hazy, but remember these fireflies, because he takes them to the cemetery for some story time. And the kid at the end of the story like remembers the fireflies and gets a little scared because his dad sneezes, and it's kind of this indication that the real monsters are within. Now, some visuals here are fun, but I think the main theme of this, while we're dressing it up in monsters and vampires and all that, I think the real theme of this is just about old age. And one of the hints here, beyond just the fact that one of the main characters is an old man, regardless of whatever supernatural like ailments he may have, is that there's a line early on when the family's having dinner, and it does a good job of like showing that the boy has a good relationship with his parents. Like he has a very good relationship. He plays around with his parents, like him and his dad play pretend with the monster mask and stuff like that. He gets on well with his mum. When they're having dinner and the dad goes to like pick up something, he sort of says "ow," and the wife goes, "Oh, what is it?" And he's like, "Oh, I think I'm just getting old." And I think because there's not really any reason for that line, it kind of like feeds into the fact that he's getting sick like everyone else. But I think that specific line, "I think I'm getting old," is just kind of like a hint of what the main theme of the story is. Because there's not really any other reason to bring up that either of the parents think that they're doing, they're experiencing aging, that it's something that they're specifically concerned about in the context of the story. And I think really what it's kind of talking about is this idea that once you get to a certain age, you're kind of living on borrowed time. And this idea that you're a vampire to society. So the vampire can be taken literal or more of a figurative thing where you're kind of sucking on the aid of the society around you, and eventually it is time to go. And maybe some old people feel guilty that they've been relying on the resources of everyone else for a little bit longer than they should have. Yeah, the old man in this says he's been around for 150 years, which obviously is supernatural and whatnot, but it feels like that's what it's going for. Because and the other thing that sort of clued me in this is that when the old man's talking to the kid, he starts talking about how the real monsters, are a genetic sort of defense against his kind. This idea that like eventually society rises up and gets rid of the old people because they need to be gone for society to keep moving forward. So it's all very like painting a picture. It's doing like a very focused idea, I think, by the end that I kind of like. It's got an oddly sweet tone, regardless of everything I've said, where a lot of the story is the old man and the young kid bonding and this kind of sweet music, and it feels almost like there's a bit of whimsy in the way this guy's talking to the kid. It never feels menacing. It never feels, because it'd be very easy to do this and have a very similar tone to that Joe Dante one that I liked from a few episodes ago, the Night Man or the Shadow Man. But it never feels like that. It's never going for that kind of vibe. Like once the old man starts opening up, it does feel a lot more like a kid talking to his grandfather. Like that's the tone they're going for. And there's kind of this impending, like, no, his time is up and he's accepted it and he's going to go soon. And you could almost argue that the reason why we're doing the whole vampire thing thematically is just because that's through a lens which the kid will understand and appeals to him because he's into monster movies. He's like trading horror movie trivia with his dad at the start of the story, for example. So, yeah, I mean, I think it's a pretty solid story. I think it gets its point across. I think the performances from the various actors are good. If I was to critique anything, it's just that maybe it's a little bit in the long side, just because I don't know if I needed quite as many long heart-to-hearts between the kid and the grandfather, or the old man, because those take up quite a bulk of the runtime, actually, when you go back and look at it. So I would maybe trim those down just a little bit, but honestly, like the final moments and the actual transformations when all the adults and the whoever else turn into the monsters and come after the old man, and the kid's final realization that this thing is, it's forever. It's not so much that he's scared that his dad's going to come after him. It's more just a reminder that what got this old man was the rest of us, and that one day it'll be his dad who's getting got from everyone else, and eventually one day it'll be him, where everyone has to come for him. There's an interesting sort of idea there that I think is okay. So yeah, that's good. I think the only thing that maybe hinders this message a little bit, because it's not even so much a message where I don't think it's saying, hey, old people are leeches and they're taking things from society. I don't think it's trying to say that or anything like that. But I think one of the weird things that popped out of my head as I was watching it is because I'm so used to the conversation in modern, the world is that there's too many rich old people who are like making life difficult for younger generations. So having that sentiment in my brain just because of the world, it does make it almost a bit weird for this story to work, even though it's not really talking about like the same exact thing. It's kind of, this is definitely more of a sweet tone and kind of a saying goodbye to life and clinging on and whatnot. So it works. It's a fun story. So that's the first one. That's Monsters. The second story, which is pretty short, although it packs a pretty big punch in terms of like ideas. So basically what the second story is that a UFO has appeared on Earth and like a world council is convened to talk about what to do. And the guy from Soviet Russia is like, we should arm the troops, get ready for a war, because they're probably going to attack. And the Americans like, no, we're rushing to conclusions, blah, blah, blah. And then in beams John Glover, who plays the alien ambassador, who comes in and says, hey, thousands of years ago, we went around and we kind of seeded life on a bunch of planets, including Earth. You're effectively our children. We've been keeping an eye on you. But we're kind of disappointed, to be honest, because your petty wars and your nuclear threats and all that, it's gotten too much. We've deemed you a failure. We're going to just eradicate all life on Earth tomorrow. And of course the humans plead and say, no, please, like, give us a chance. Like, and he's like, you've been given plenty of chances. We've been debating this on our homeworld for centuries. And he's like, but fine, give us one more day. Give us that one day and we'll prove we can change. So he's like, okay, fine, I'll give you one day, we'll see what you can do. So he beams away, and the bulk of the sort of the time skip here in the middle of the story is that these world leaders and delegates are in a room and they draw up plans for world peace, where the US and Soviet Russia have agreed to disarm, all this stuff is going on, they're up all night fixing all this stuff. And the twist at the end of this is when they hand this big book to John Glover the alien with the plans for world peace, that for the first time in human history, we've all agreed on world peace. This is what we're going to have. John Glover starts laughing and says, you misunderstood me. You're a failure because you're not good enough at war yet. Because we breed planets so that we can have warriors, but your weapons are so primitive, your disputes are so petty, you're such a disappointment. And honestly, the fact that you spent your final day trying to save yourself, appealing to peace and all that, just proves that you're not really warriors. That at the heart of it, you yearn for this, not what we want. So nice try. And then he beams out, and then the world's going to be destroyed, and that's the end of the story. I actually really like this. As far as the shorter stories go, that sometimes get sandwiched in the middle of these Twilight Zone 80s episodes, I really like this one. Because I think what it does quite smartly is that it kind of like uses pre-existing sci-fi as a shorthand. Because it's effectively very similar to something like Day the Earth Stood Still, where an alien comes down and explains that Earth is, up to no good. And aliens have decided that we may have to sort of take everyone out. Like, not just one alien race either, like an entire council of aliens have said, Earth's too dangerous, they're too problematic, they're blowing each other up with nukes and blah, blah, blah. And there's this assumption, the joke of the story is that the humans all assume that that's what the alien here is saying, that we have to be better, we're too petty, we're too busy fighting. Obviously the right thing is for us to stop all this. But then the alien says, no, we actually want you to be better fighters. That's funny and also oddly kind of sweet in a weird way, because this idea that, we all deep down know what right is. We all deep down know that peace is better and that we should strive for peace and that we shouldn't be having conflicts and we should treat each other kindly. And we've just not been doing it. Only for the sad realization to be that this alien race doesn't see things the same way. So it's almost, because that's actually what I really liked about the narration at the end as well, is that the narrator comes in and says, the world peace was achieved, however briefly, in the Twilight Zone. Just for, like, not even a day, because by the time they finished this, it was, like, almost time to, go away. But for that final hour or whatever, true world peace had been achieved. It was actually kind of a sweet thought. So I think this one worked in a surprising number of levels, given how short it is. It's a really simple idea, but it plays off on your expectations, both we as a viewer, but also the characters in the story make an assumption that inherently makes you kind of root for them because it's the right assumption to make from a moral standpoint, but it turns out to be the wrong assumption in terms of what the aliens actually want. And John Glover just cackling with laughter as he beams away is entertaining. So yeah, I actually really like this middle story. Short and sweet, but I think it really made a good little point that had some layers to it and then got out and just left me with good vibes. It just the distraught on the faces that they'd accomplished something that we've never accomplished in human history, only to find out that's not what the powers that be, the gods themselves, actually want. Is I don't know, soul destroying, I guess. So, really, it's darkly funny, right? It's darkly funny, but the fact that they tried to do the right thing's actually kind of a nice, uplifting part in the middle of the dark humor. So it works on multiple levels. I really like this one. So the final story of this episode, though, is called A Matter of Minutes. And this features the Universal backlot, which I'll just say right away, because as soon as they started walking down, there's sort of like an intersection of like 3 streets. Actually, it'll be 4 streets. It'll be a crosswalk, but there's like 3 directions that I recognize here from just multiple TV shows, multiple movies. I like the corner of this intersection is where the Daily Planet is in Lois and Clark, the New Adventures of Superman. Obviously, the Daily Planet Globe's not there here. There's a part of the street here I've seen used in multiple TV shows. The one that I remember on recently was Sleepwalkers, the 1993 Stephen King adaptation. Actually, technically, the last thing I saw it was Maxine. But in Maxine, they were actually meant to be on the Universal lot. Like, that was part of the plot of the movies. They were driving through the Universal lot. But the point being is I recognize some of this stuff just from other things. But so this is, what's his face? Is it Adam Arkin? Is the name here? Yeah. The actor who I mainly know from Halloween H2O, although I think I remember him guesting on 8 Simple Rules at some point as well. Him and his wife wake up and they're, complaining about the noise and that some neighbor's doing some renovation work or something. And then they kind of, start getting a bit kissy. They're kind of happy, whatever. But then they hear a noise. There's someone coming through their front door. They get scared, they get dressed, they jump out of bed, grab a baseball bat. And the Blue Man Group are moving around and seem to be like, well, at first they're assuming that they're being robbed, but then they notice that they're actually bringing things into the house. Like, they're bringing furniture in, they're putting stuff in its right place, and they're very confused. And the Blue Man Group, and when I say Blue Man Group, I'm saying that because they're dressed all in blue and have like blue, like nylon masks. So they're just all blue. So they leave their house, they walk around, they see all these blue, like, workers going in and out of all the houses on the street. They're very confused. Then they go to the Universal backlot, which is meant to be like the main street in their town, and they're looking around, and it's all these blue workers putting things up, painting stuff, whatever it is. And they're very like, what is going on? What is this? And they even step out like through a door at one point, and there's like a white void. Like, there's just no reality there. So, I mean, at this point, I don't know what I'm thinking. Am I thinking they're in a virtual reality simulation? It was reminding me a little bit of that classic Twilight Zone episode from season 5, which was the couple wake up and like everything in the town seems kind of fake. It was giving me kind of vibes of that a little bit. But then eventually a guy in an orange sort of outfit who still has his like face revealed starts talking to them and tries to explain that they should calm down and come with him and he'll explain what's going on. So we get a really silly explanation on a computer where there's like a cartoon that they've sort of superimposed onto the computer screen. But basically he explains that they are building the minute 11:37. That was a big plot point when they woke up, is that their alarm clock was stuck in 11:37. And he explains that time is like this, is that time is like a long train car, and each car of the train is a minute. And that they're currently building 11:37, about 2 hours after what the time actually is. Or before what the time actually is. Whatever. Like, like the actual real world's at like 9:30 right now, but they're building 9:37 and putting all the finishing touches on it. And he explains, like, here, let's go through this sort of portal door. And they go, and it's like a full white void, but there's some dirt being like sort of dug up. And it's like, this is Christmas Day, like, 6 months from now. And so this is how far we start a day or a minute in advance, is about 6 months. And it takes all that time to put everything in and get it all ready. So basically what he's explaining here is that stuff just doesn't stay where it is minute to minute. There are these like behind the time Blue Man Group workers who are working constantly to put everything in every single minute. So the house you live in isn't the same minute to minute, but these workers are making it all look the same so that you never know that like you're in a different place and that everything around you has changed in reality. But that's what's constantly happening. He explains that when they make a mistake, that'll be like something like when you're looking for your car keys, you can't find them, but then they're in the place that you checked first, and you could have sworn you checked there, but they weren't there, but they are now. That's when they've made a mistake, or something like that. So, I didn't love this story just because I think the actual concept of it is a little bit silly. And I don't really feel like I get what if this is trying to say anything about how time works or how time moves, I can't fathom what it is. But I will say the actual experience of these two actors, this married couple looking around, getting worried, not really understanding it, and then this guy explaining all the visuals of all these like Blue Men Group workers just doing all these jobs around this big set and this big backlot were fun visuals. Like, it was an entertaining story to watch, even though I think the actual science fiction part of it is just kind of like a roll your eyes. Oh, this is just kind of a bunch of fantasy nonsense. like the explanation of this, it doesn't appeal to me as a concept. But the actual experience of watching them go through the story was fun enough. And then, like, he says, hey, like, you can never go back to the real time. You're kind of stuck behind the curtain of time now with us. And it happens from time to time. It's not a big deal. He never explains what they'll do now that they're stuck here. Like, do they become more Blue Man workers? or what? Like, because he says it happens from time to time. So where are all these other, like, time refugees that aren't in the real timeline anymore? Like, where are they going? But I thought this is the one thing that I'd maybe critique, though, from like just an actual like storytelling perspective, is that he says they can't stay here. They say, no, we want to, and then run away and hide, and are able to sort of hide successfully. And their plan is to wait until it hits actual 11:37, because his watch is actually still running on real time. So they know that 11:37 is coming up. And this guy who's been explaining everything to them finds them again right before that time and says, hey, you have to come with me. And it sounded quite concerned, like, oh, when the real time like gets here, you don't just like integrate into it. Like, maybe something bad might happen to them because they're waiting here. When the time shockwave hits them of like people appearing, and nothing bad happens. And I thought that was a bit. And it's not so much that I need something bad to like completely fall through, but I feel like it felt like he was trying to save their life and say, hey, this is dangerous. You can't be here when time gets here. But then nothing actually happens of consequence when time does get there. I mean, they kind of bump into someone when people appear around them, but that's about it. Maybe there's like a risk that depending on where you're standing, you could integrate with another human being or something, because that's where they're standing or whatever. I don't know. But there's like no consequence. The episode just ends after they're back in real time. There's people around, they hug, and they're like, oh, I can't wait to tell my science buddy what happened here. And it just ends on a happy note. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. I was genuinely expecting, based on the way this guy was concerned about them trying to stay here when time was going to catch up with them, I really thought there was going to be a consequence for it, like a bad consequence of why they can't risk this and why it's maybe not possible. And maybe they still successfully do it, but there's a close call where they almost die because it's very risky to be here when time catches up with them. But instead it's nothing. They're fine. And then the episode just ends in a kind of like, well, that was a weird little experiment thing we went through. Oh well, let's get back to our day. And they just move on from there. But as much as I'm critiquing some of the logic of this, it was entertaining enough to watch. Like the couple's reactions to stuff was entertaining. The visuals of all the Blue Men Group, moving around and working on stuff. It was at least unique. It was a unique concept and unique visuals, even though I don't think the actual explanation and the way this time working this way isn't that interesting to me as a sci-fi concept. It's a little bit silly, but yeah, it was all right. Like, if this is the weakest of the three stories, it's a pretty solid episode of this show. When typically, even when you have a great story, there's usually another one that's going to let it down a little bit. And the overall average here is pretty good for this episode, so I can't be too mad, all things considered. So that's my feelings on this Twilight Zone episode. Pretty good. Yeah, I think the first story with the old man is kind of sweet. Some fun horror movie references and visuals, which they get to play with a little bit. Comparing the old man, and that's the other thing, the old man keeps telling the kid to read Mark Twain instead of all this horror nonsense, and maybe he'll learn something, or what. Maybe there's like a reference there, because I've never read any Mark Twain. I don't know if he's drawn some parallels to something there, but I know the middle story was very good, very effective with a short amount of time. Made a really, really nice kind of dark, ironic sort of twist. And then the last one was a fun watch, even if I think the science fiction element was a little bit weird. But hey, not bad at all. So thank you very much for joining. You can, of course, support all the content over at patreon.com/MailFuzzTV. Like, subscribe, all the usual YouTube stuff. Let me know what you thought of this episode down in the comments. That's been Twilight Zone. Thank you very much for joining. I always appreciate it. Keep watching TV in the Twilight Zone.